Hello and welcome to the next episode of my video series, Learn With Me, Opsix. So far I'd say we've covered the majority of the key features of the synthesizer. We've made some FM sounds, we've experimented with user algorithms, and we've moved on to doing some non-FM sounds. So what we did first was some additive synthesis. What we're going to try and do today is some AM synthesis. So first, what exactly is AM synthesis? Well, amplitude modulation means rather than in FM synthesis where we modulate the frequency of one operator with another, amplitude modulation modulates the amplitude of one frequency with another. And there are two main ways of doing that. The one that's commonly called amplitude modulation works as follows. The signal that we're modulating has some variation. Usually there's some center point and it's considered to have positive and negative values either side of that. With amplitude modulation, the zero level on the modulator corresponds to a zero amplitude on the modulated signal, and some other level corresponds to a 1.0, as in no reduction in the amplitude. What happens then if you go below zero? Well, in traditional or the common amplitude modulation case, once you reach that 0 point, if you continue below zero, the amplitude of the resulting signal remains zero. The difference here is that when we're doing ring modulation, when we go below zero, we invert the signal, and then the amplitude of the resulting signal is the same as if it were a positive modulation, but with the signal inverted. You can sort of see it on this diagram here, but it's not tremendously clear. So let's get an init patch and let's start doing some of this. So I think what I'm going to do is go to one of the relatively simple algorithm types, algorithm 5. So this gives me three carriers and 3 modulators, so each one is modulated by 1. Since ring modulation is this amplitude modulation, and I listened to it when we were experimenting before, I feel like having ratios which are quite a long way apart is probably beneficial. And also, if the ratios are co-prime, meaning they don't share any common factors, it will mean the periodicity is longer. So what I'm going to do to that end is I'm going to think of the first 6 prime numbers. So 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. And then I'm going to pair them. So this one is going to be 2. This one is going to be 5. Sorry, this one is going to be 3. This one is going to be 5. This one is going to be 7. This one is going to be 11. And this one is going to be 13. So the reason I've arranged them this way is I want the product of each of these, which is the lowest common multiple that they'll have, to be as close to equal as possible. So if I paired a large carrier ratio with a large modulator ratio, the lowest common multiple would be very large. So I've paired the smallest with the largest, the second with the second, the third with the third. So that was my logic here in setting these. I'm going to set all of these levels to 0. And now we're going to set the algorithm, or rather the modes. So consider that for a given operator, the mode indicates what happens with incoming signals in the modulation routing. So the modulators don't actually need any change to be made. Because they have no incoming signal, it doesn't matter what mode they're in. The exception here, I guess, is operator 6, which has a feedback loop in this algorithm. So let's set to ring modulation 1, 3, 5, and 6. So again, we don't necessarily need to set 6 here, but I've decided to go for it. Now, because I don't actually have a ratio of 1 on any of these, it's going to be playing above the pitch that I would expect. So what I'm going to do to compensate for that is to transpose down 1 octave. If instead of 2 this were 3, that would be an octave and a fifth. So then I could do 1 octave down and an additional 7 semitones, but I chose 2. So this should be fine. Let me put this up. Okay, so now let's listen to what the ring modulation is doing. Let's bring in the next harmonic. Ring modulate, next harmonic. Ring modulate. So what I'm going to do first then is I'm going to listen to the sound, and I'm going to bring in first the carriers to try and find the right initial timbre. Then I'm going to bring in the modulation. Then I'm going to adjust the envelope. So we can already hear ring modulation has something of a metallic sound to it, and I think we already have that characteristic metallic sound coming out. And I think metallic makes me think of something being struck, maybe, a sort of metallic ring. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to start by shaping the envelopes, and I'm going to go for plucky envelopes. So that tells me at the moment I want no sustain on any of them. It's easiest to just go through and do these as a batch. So now the first carrier, I'm imagining that I'm going to want the carriers having longer decay and release than the modulators. So I'm going to start with the longest decay on the lowest pitched one, and I'm going to make the decays shorter as I go up the pitches. So the first one could have, let's say, a 4-second decay and a 2-second release, and then the next one, the next carrier, can have a 3-second decay and a 1.5-second release. The next one can have a 2-second decay and a 1-second release. And I'm going to continue that pattern, but I'm going to start halving these things. So this is going to be a 1-second decay with a 0.5-second release. Then a 0.5-second decay with a 1/4-second release. Then a 1/4-second decay with an 1/8-second release. So I just noticed sustain, I heard some sound still, so sustain wasn't 0 on one of them. So I actually quite like that non-zero sustain. So what I might do is add just to the carriers sustain that gets greater as higher frequencies. So a sustain of 5 on operator 1, a sustain of 10 on operator 3, and a sustain of 15 on operator 5. So let's try again. So we can have that ongoing ring. I feel like that's a nice timbre thing. But listening to this, I think, even though this is not frequency modulation, I think we can get some of that flavor from it, which I quite enjoy. So where are we going to go from here? Well, I feel like we have a relatively natural sound here in terms of the decay. I'd like to add some velocity expression, and I'd also like to detune a little bit, just add a little motion. So I'm going to do this in a pretty formulaic manner. I'm going to be tuning everything down, and I'm going to go a little bit more detune, as we get first up the carriers and then up the modulators. So carrier 1 is going to go minus 0.5, carrier 3 minus 1, minus 1.5, minus 2, minus 2.5, minus 3. So this gives us just a little bit more movement going on. It's not necessarily very, very strong, but it's a little bit more. Next, velocity sensitivity. So as I've done in the past, I would like the fundamental to be least affected by velocity, and I would like the highest frequencies to be most affected. Just like I tried to do my envelope shapes, getting shorter at higher frequencies, reflecting an acoustic sound. This velocity sensitivity reflects an acoustic sound. So a gentle tap on something metal tends to only excite the fundamental. The harder you hit it, the more of the other frequencies come out. So velocity sensitivity, let's start with operator 1. Let's set that to 25, and then 30, and then 35, 40, 45, and 50. And one thing that we also haven't done so far is done much in the way of operator volume scaling across the keyboard. So let's go up to a high register. And the pitch is very high, right? So I might think, well, let's say that the higher frequencies, oops, let's leave that at C4, could be scaled down up there. Let's listen in the bass register now. So what we might want to do then is the highest frequency. You might want to bring that up a bit, and the lowest frequency, put that down a bit. So this is pretty interesting. I would say it's not particularly common to go for a sort of ring modulator based sound. The next movement I think I would like is something with the filter, but I don't want to go overboard with this because I think that metallic ring modulated sound is working quite well for us here. So let's look at the filter. And whoops, what filters have we got? So maybe just the 12 dB low pass filter. Let's go up a little bit so it's easier to hear. So I'd like some of that brightness to be taken out there. I'm going to go and look at the filter envelope, and for now I'm going to make it short so it's very easy for me to hear what's happening. So I'm having now that envelope movement controlled by velocity. And what I think I'll do as well is I'll have the filter cutoff additionally be modulated by velocity. So let's go to the amplitude the modulation matrix, and let's say keyboard velocity is going to go to filter cutoff. It's already sounding pretty interesting. I'm picturing having some sort of additional modulation going on, almost like a tremolo. So what I'm going to do to make that happen, I think, is I'm going to use an LFO on the filter. While I'm here, I may also look at the sounds in the upper and lower register. So let's go up. So let's turn this LFO on to a large degree. I think I might like it going faster than that. So let's look at it. I like the fade in there, but obviously the amplitude is much too high, so let's... So let's try playing a little. Let's go down. I quite like the sound. So what would I like to change? How would I like to make this more interesting? I think the movement is okay so far. So what else can I do in the way of velocity expression? What might be interesting here is maybe add a little resonance to the filter. So let's have a look at that. Let's see how that sounds. So keyboard velocity destination is filter resonance. Okay, I think that's quite interesting. I think the resonance adds a little character there. Maybe we'll try and do a unison. So what unison here is every time I press a note, it plays more than one. This is how in tune they are with one another. Remember that this parameter is not like a per voice parameter. This is a program level parameter, so we can't modulate this. Or it's maybe not reasonable to modulate it. Sounds pretty good. Maybe it's a bit... Okay, and interestingly, one of the things I tend to look for in sounds is how do they sound without effects? So this doesn't have effects on it, and I feel like we already... We already have something which feels quite expressive and has a relatively interesting tone. I'm going to revisit the mixer section now, so I'm just going to turn everything down. I'm going to try again. Sounding pretty interesting, I would say. Anything else that I might like to adjust? Maybe I'll try the lo-fi mode. set the phase to 3, and I'll try changing these to the lower fidelity. Eight-bit sine. So I think it adds a tiny bit of texture there. Final thing to think about would be maybe I can make the modulators have a slightly softer attack just to add a little more character here. So let's see how that sounds. So let's go half a second, quarter of a second, and then eighth of a second. So now that gives me a little sort of opening sound that's happening. But what I can do with that is add another velocity expression. So I think this is going to be interesting. I can say, again, keyboard velocity, going to program attack time. More of a sort of gong-like sound with that slower attack. I'm quite pleased with how that sounds. I feel like maybe it's all a bit quiet, so let's turn the level up a bit. Let's see what happens if I add some feedback. Feedback is not clearly audible. It's only affecting this operator 6. And I would say it's not having a tremendously large effect because feedback on amplitude modulation is kind of just squaring the waveform off because you're increasing its amplitude. I'll leave it at a non-zero level. I don't know if I can even hear the difference, but I'm going to go for it anyway. So let's go for some effects on here just to add something to it. That sounds interesting. A delay is always interesting. So let's So at the moment we're only hearing the wet signal. Okay, so I don't want the delay to be too present. Let's look here. Interesting, LFO filter is an effect of its own. Let's see. Okay, and I guess finally, let's go for a shimmer reverb, but let's try one of the unusual ones. Let's try horror. Okay. So let's try playing a little bit. So in the very bass register it sounds quite unusual, but I think we have an interesting timbre. So this is another possibility that we've explored. So that's additive synthesis, and that's amplitude modulation used as a synthesis tool, as well as the traditional FM synthesis. I'll try and come up with maybe a couple of other unorthodox ways to use the synthesizer. I guess we also did subtractive synthesis. And hopefully, after I've explored those eventualities, we can try and bring a patch together that utilizes more than one of these synthesis methods simultaneously. So in any case, I hope you've enjoyed this episode and you've been enjoying the series so far. I hope you'll join me as I continue to dig deeper and try to get the best out of the Opsix. But in any case, and most importantly, thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.